A Chinese-American actress who had appeared in Fast and Furious and the action film Hitman suddenly died without warning at her boyfriend's home. Her body had more than 300 injuries. Every piece of evidence seemed to point to severe physical abuse. But her boyfriend insisted that it was an accidental incident caused by drug use. The suspicious crime scene seemed to tell a different story, yet after a trial, the defendant was acquitted on the spot. So was this a perfect escape from justice? Or was there another hidden truth behind the case? Today, let's take a look at the mysterious case of an Asian American actress and her tragic death. On the 11th of September 2009, at an apartment in the city of Monrovia, Los Angeles County, California, a frantic 911 call was made to the local emergency center. The caller was Brian Landis, a 5-year-old high-income businessman. He described himself as a Christian evangelist with a master's degree in theology. In 2000, he had even appeared on a Fox reality television show where he was named one of America's most eligible and attractive bachelors. His appearance and manner of speaking were both highly charismatic. The girlfriend he mentioned during the call was Felicia, a Singaporean-American woman. At the age of 53, she and her family had immigrated to Los Angeles. She was beautiful, had a striking figure, and had worked as a model when she was younger. She had appeared on the covers of custom car magazines and had also taken supporting roles in major Hollywood productions such as Hitman and Fast and Furious. At the time, she was relatively well known within the Asian American community. However, most of her income came from the adult entertainment industry. She had appeared in a number of adult productions and had built a considerable following in that field. By 2009, at the age of 31, she was planning to retire. She wanted to slow down and return to a more ordinary life. She was even planning to go back to school. The two met in April 2009. Brian's active and enthusiastic pursuit quickly won Felicia over. Just 2 months later, Felicia moved into Brian's apartment in Monrovia. They began living together. No one could have imagined that this seemingly intimate relationship would last less than half a year before ending in an extremely tragic death. Now, let's return to the day of the incident. Brian called the police at 11:48 that morning. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, Felicia had already lost all vital signs. Despite their efforts to save her, they were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The first police officer to enter the apartment later recalled that the entire master bedroom was in complete chaos. It looked nothing like a normal living space. The closet door had been ripped off its track, and there was even a hole punched through part of it. There were numerous bloodstains and visible scrape marks on the interior wall. Large pools of blood remained on the bed, while blankets and pillows had been thrown around the room. Strands of hair that appeared to have been violently pulled out were scattered across the floor. Felicia was found collapsed on the bathroom floor. Her body was already cold. Not long afterward, the results of the forensic examination were released. Even experienced investigators who had spent more than a decade solving murder cases were stunned. Felicia had more than 300 clearly identifiable injuries caused by blunt force trauma. They included scratches, abrasions, and lacerations. That did not even include the deep bruising beneath the skin that was not immediately visible. The injuries extended from her neck and chest all the way down to her ankles. Almost no part of her body remained uninjured. Among them, the injuries to her limbs were especially revealing. From her elbows to her hands, and from her knees to her feet, there were extensive defensive wounds. These are classic injuries seen when a person curls up and raises their arms and legs to protect themselves from an attack. The medical examiner concluded that the immediate cause of death was mechanical asphyxia. Suspicion immediately focused on Brian, the person who had reported the death. At the time of the incident, he and Felicia were the only two people inside the apartment. But what was even more unusual was Brian's reaction to his girlfriend's death. He appeared remarkably calm. He did not collapse emotionally or lose control. Instead, he simply sat in the living room and explained the situation to police. He claimed that both of them had taken a controlled substance known as GHB. The substance was illegal and was sometimes referred to as liquid ecstasy. Abuse of it could carry a high risk of fatal overdose. Brian said that the two of them had been engaging in intense, intimate activity at the time and that the death had been an unintended accident. However, police quickly discovered several additional details that appeared to point toward him. The first involved the closet at the crime scene. The height and trajectory of the bloodstains were completely consistent with someone hiding inside the closet, being pulled out, and repeatedly attacked. This suggested that Felicia had tried to climb into the closet to escape, but she had apparently been dragged back out. Another suspicious detail was the timeline. Brian claimed that at around 8 a.m., he noticed that Felicia was behaving strangely, but he did not call emergency services until almost noon. That meant there was a full 4-hour delay. He explained that he had been busy dealing with work and taking business calls. But what kind of work could cause someone to ignore a girlfriend who was in a potentially life-threatening condition for 4 hours? There was another suspicious detail. When police arrived, the clothes dryer inside the apartment was still running. Inside were the bed sheets and pillowcases from the master bedroom. Investigators suspected that this could have been an attempt to clean the crime scene and destroy evidence. Brian was arrested on the same day. On the 16th of September 2009, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office officially charged him with 2 crimes, attempted murder and torture. His bail was set at $2 million. Prosecutors argued that Felicia had been beaten and tortured for an extended period before her death. She ultimately died from asphyxiation. They described the case as a classic example of intimate partner violence ending in homicide. If convicted, Brian could have faced a sentence ranging from 25 years in prison to life imprisonment. On the 16th of November 2011, the case officially went to trial in Pasadena Superior Court. Brian hired a team of 5 top defense attorneys to represent him. As soon as the trial began, prosecutors presented a series of pieces of evidence. They pointed to the defensive wounds on Felicia's body, the signs of a struggle at the scene, Brian's delay in reporting the incident, and his suspicious behavior involving the washing and drying of the bedding. Taken together, the evidence appeared to indicate an intentional act of extreme violence. However, prosecutors faced one major problem. They could not establish a clear motive for murder. Police investigated the couple's entire history of communication, but they found no major conflict between them. Before the incident, the two had even planned to travel together and attend a wedding anniversary celebration for Brian's parents. There was no evidence that their relationship had seriously deteriorated. There was also no apparent financial dispute. Prosecutors could only argue that the death resulted from an explosive act of violence within an intimate relationship. They could not provide a specific reason why Brian would have committed the killing. Unexpectedly, the defense attorneys attacked this very weakness. They completely reversed the core logic of the prosecution's case. They argued that Felicia had not been murdered at all. Instead, they claimed that she had died from an accidental overdose. According to the defense, all of the injuries on her body were caused after she took the drug and lost control of her body. She allegedly suffered seizures, fell repeatedly, and accidentally injured herself. The defense argued that Brian had nothing to do with those injuries. It is important to explain that GHB is a central nervous system depressant. In many countries around the world, including the United States and China, it is strictly controlled. It is highly addictive, and the risk of death from an overdose is significant. Therefore, illegal possession, purchase, or sale of the substance can constitute a criminal offense. At trial, the defense specifically called experts in the field to testify. They presented cases involving people who had overdosed on GHB and suffered severe injuries after becoming impaired. The patterns of their injuries, they argued, were highly similar to those found on Felicia. Toxicology reports also showed that Felicia had a very high concentration of GHB in her system, along with a small amount of cocaine. Several witnesses also confirmed that Felicia had a long history of using controlled substances. The defense's strongest counter-argument came from the forensic expert they called to testify. The expert argued in court that the cardiac electrical activity and lack of a pulse recorded by emergency responders were findings commonly associated with a drug overdose or severe blood loss. If Felicia had truly died from mechanical asphyxia, the expert argued, these physiological findings should not have occurred. With that single argument, the prosecution's most important foundation, regarding the cause of death, was seriously undermined. Meanwhile, prosecutors had not prepared sufficient evidence to effectively rebut the claim at that moment. But the defense did not stop there. They pointed out that no blood had been found on the pillows inside the dryer. Therefore, they argued, there was no solid basis for the theory that Brian had been cleaning up the crime scene. Brian also had no prior criminal record. He had no history of violence or domestic abuse. The defense argued that there was no reason to believe he had suddenly transformed into a murderer. After several days of trial, the murder charge that had initially seemed obvious began to face significant reasonable doubt. Finally, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury announced its verdict on the 9th of October 2011. Brian was found not guilty of murder. He was also found not guilty of torture. The defendant was acquitted and released immediately in court. The verdict immediately sparked intense public controversy. The investigators who had handled the case, as well as Felicia's family and friends, struggled to accept the outcome. The lead investigator continued to maintain that the case represented a tragedy of justice. However, The jury's verdict was based on the evidence presented in court and followed the fundamental legal principle of presumed innocence. After the verdict became final, Brian regained his freedom. 6 months later, he even went to a Los Angeles prison as an evangelist to preach to inmates. To many people, that behavior seemed deeply ironic. Felicia's life, meanwhile, had ended forever at the age of 31. Her dream of leaving the entertainment industry and returning to an ordinary life was ultimately left unfinished in the most painful way imaginable. To this day, the case remains a notable example frequently discussed within the American legal community. On one hand, it demonstrates the potentially fatal consequences of controlled substances. On the other, it highlights the critical role of reasonable doubt in the American justice system. The hundreds of injuries on Felicia's body were real. The extremely high level of controlled substances in her system was also real. Some people believe her death was the result of brutal violence. Others remain convinced that it was a tragic accident. But the truth may forever remain sealed inside that chaotic apartment on that terrible day. All that remains are arguments that have continued for years, and a costly warning for those who are still alive. Always avoid and stay away from illegal and dangerous drugs. At the same time, remain alert to the risks of violence within intimate relationships. That brings today's story to an end. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, follow, and save the video. I'll see you again in the next episode.